Any one of these will be a disaster in itself.
And let the officers advance into the crowd.
This guy had a crowd of people jump up on his truck.
An intense silence shrouded the courtroom as the verdicts were read. Not guilty, over and over again. Tim Wind, innocent of all charges. Ted Brasino, innocent of all charges. Stacy Kuhn, innocent of all charges. And Lawrence Powell, innocent of all charges but one. And the jury deadlocked on that one. There were broad smiles and hugs for the defendants after the verdicts were read. This home video of the police beating of Rodney King was not enough to convince the jury that the officers were guilty of excessive use of force. The verdicts took many people by surprise.
It's understated that the Rodney King riots were a monumental part of American history, and it's easy to forget as it's never really talked about. Whenever the Los Angeles race riot is brought up in conversation, it's often talked about as an issue between black and white people, but that's a misconception set up by the media broadcasting of the riot. In the earlier clips, there was only glimpses of black and white men, which was the main focus that the media wanted to highlight. It was a race war, with two sides. However, what people fail to talk about, or at least find it hard to discuss, are the other participants of the riot, whether they be victims or aggressors. I am, of course, talking about the role that Asian Americans and Mexican Americans had in the Rodney King riots. But before we get back into talking about the Rodney King riots, it's important we establish the existence of interminority racism, what it is, as well as discussing why it happens. While racism is often portrayed in media and film to be a relationship between a white person and a minority, which is a problem that happens a lot today, it isn't the only relationship that exists. There are high incidences of black on Asian or Mexican, and vice versa, with news articles highlighting discord in certain communities. You may be wondering, what about racial unity between minorities on working together to progress themselves forward against the oppression caused by white people? If there's actually infighting between minority groups, then what are they fighting for? Well, they're fighting to get out of the bottom rung. The bottom rung, or also described as the bottom of the social ladder, is the representation of the hierarchical push and pull that exists between minority groups. Over time, the hierarchy between the minority changed with different events in history or as a result of a catastrophe. For example, after the events of 9/11, Muslim Americans were considered to have dropped in ranking, as shown in this essay. But to make this topic easily digestible, I'll be focusing on the events leading up to the Los Angeles race riots and how it was a bubble waiting to be popped. In terms of racial division, I'll begin to list the different factors and reasons that led to the increasing tensions in the 1970s. Starting with the Latinos living in Los Angeles, the first issue that arose was that since the 1930s, members of the Mexican community, such as LULAC, had insisted that they were white since they were already legally classified as one without any of the social benefits. The uses of hiding under a white label only just raises the gap between African Americans and Mexicans as Mexicans climb the social ladder. This did, however, come with its shortcomings. In fact, it caused an even bigger setback for Mexican Americans later down the line to reach true equality, as they couldn't really back up their facts that anti-Mexican discrimination existed, since they were legally classified as whites. On the other hand, African Americans could prove their own discrimination, and each case that they won in combating discrimination, Latinos have used to win theirs. In Los Angeles, there have been cases where Mexicans would claim their whiteness to get out of segregated communities, leaving behind blacks. In the 1960s, leading to the 1970s, there was an influx of immigrants moving into the country. While this isn't anything new, this did, however, change the population demographic in Los Angeles in the 1970s as Hispanic overtook blacks in the census and continually grew. Having been put a step down the social ladder, population-wise, there were multiple effects that came out of this. The first was that the societal value that Mexicans provided as part of the immigration surge that was happening in Los Angeles. When a big new group shows up overshadowing a smaller group, it only makes sense for corporations and government to cater to that bigger demographic. But in order to service the new group that sometimes can speak in their native language, they'll need to hire those that can speak the language. Having more of a societal value, Mexican Americans were raised higher than African Americans, and as a result, blacks saw themselves being pushed out of their jobs in favor for a lighter-skinned bilingual group. The gradual push-out didn't stop at jobs. It also affected black families, who were regular subscribers of welfare, having lost it to a Hispanic family. It wasn't a surprise that blacks began to feel like they were being pushed out of the city with the rising Hispanic population. As for Asian Americans, they've had a long history of being oppressed from both Mexicans and blacks due to being put on the highest of the social ladder by whites. This started in 1966 when the term model minority was first introduced. The term puts together Asian Americans as a singular group with traits of being a hard worker and having good family values, leading to them to overcome racism from whites. While this is far from the truth, the stigma was already placed on them with a seemingly clear rise of the latter over Mexicans and blacks combined. There are multiple studies showcasing that Asians have out-earned blacks and Mexicans, signaling that they were the closest to being white. There was also a rising population increase of Korean merchants in the black community that moved in after the white riots in 1966. In the 90s, there were increasing complaints over the price hiking Koreans began to impose, as well as anti-black negative stereotypes they imposed on black shoppers. This built up a bigger incident that occurred a year before the Los Angeles race riots, was the killing of a 15-year-old black girl named Latasha Harling by a Korean merchant, Sung Ya-do. This shooting was done inside of a liquor store involving a robbery of a bottle of orange juice and faced an uproar from the black community. The anger grew even further when, despite being charged guilty for voluntary manslaughter, they've only received probation. This was compared to the Rodney King trials, where all the cops but one were acquitted, raising the sentiment that Koreans and whites can just beat up or kill any blacks anytime they can. This was the needle that popped the bubble of built-up frustration over the years.
Once the political anger took over for the first 24 hours, the next 24 hours, they seem to target the electronic stores and the jewelries, and a lot of Korean-owned stores. That's who they targeted, and they definitely hit them a lot.
Why the Korean stores?
Well, because the Koreans have a reputation, and I'm generalizing, and you can't generalize because it's very dangerous, but a lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them do not treat people, customers, with respect. They treat them like crap. They believe that every time a black person or a Mexican person goes to the store, they're going in to rob, so they treat them like thieves.
For orange. And fuck all these Korean motherfuckers that's out here killing all these motherfuckers for no reason, you know, for orange juice and shit, you know what I'm saying? Orange juice, you know. Bitch shot the girl in back her head, you know, she buckled up, you know, that's kind of fucked up. And then the bitch about, you know, I get that bitch, life for some good fucking.
The victims. My friends are good Christians. We've been through so much, and to go through this, everything, 42 years down the drain.
You directed at Korean stores.
Yep.
Why?
It's the gap. It's from the gap between races, especially black and Korean.
41 Korean businesses in South Central have been torched, dozens looted. In this overwhelmingly black and Hispanic area, Koreans own many of the small businesses. They're insular, they employ their own, they keep to themselves. Blacks say that's the problem.
I'm not surprised that the Koreans got targeted because their prices are high, their attitude is wrong, and they just don't seem to have any respect for the black community.
You know how it all started? The first thing when a girl got killed from the Oriental.
Like thieves.
Koreans have never been a part of the community. I know a lot of the business owners, but it is a fact they're just not a part of the community. They don't understand to this day why they were selected. They still do not understand that the community resents their attitude, resents their arrogance, resents the fact that they are not a part of the community. It's okay to do business in the community and live outside of it, but you cannot separate yourself from it.
In our neighborhoods, that we didn't want them, that something should be done to curtail the number of licenses issued out, etc., etc. No one paid attention. Then we went back and we said, hey, the Koreans are mistreating us, they're discriminating against us, they're not giving us jobs, they're taking all the resources away from the community, they don't live in the community, they're insensitive, they're racist. Nothing was done about it. We've been complaining about unemployment, so on and so forth.
Having been decades since the Rodney King riots and discussions about racial unity seemingly have gotten better over time. However, through a quick Google search, it's apparent that there's still a lot of work to be done. In all the chaos, it's easy to forget who placed the ladder that started everything. The moment you begin to realize that minorities pushing down other minorities in hopes of getting to the same place as whites is actually detrimental for every minority group. But it's actually through this that the whites benefit the most, as seen in the LA riots. Whites, while being portrayed as the biggest victims of the riots, actually took that credit away from minority groups that actually suffered, like Mexican Americans and the Korean Americans. The fear-mongering of the media broadcast was just a form of social engineering to manufacture fear and hysteria against blacks, once again pushing down a race down the ladder while ensuring that whites remained on top. At the end of the day, it's when we recognize this that minorities could be able to work together to achieve true racial unity if we look past personal biases set up by society.